I'm Rupert Koopman, Conservation Manager at the Botanical Society of South Africa, and it gives me such great pleasure to be here this evening as part of this book, which is basically a culmination of two lives' work, and then also a wonderful story of collaboration. And just to get it going, I see there's also questions about ordering the book that will be answered later on. Oh, thank you, Belinda. But right now, I'm going to introduce the publisher of the Struik Nature, the imprint of Penguin Random House, South Africa, Pippa, who will open for us this evening. And the order of events, I think let's leave that as a surprise. Stick around and see what's going to happen. Thank you very much. Go, Pippa.
Thank you, Rupert, and welcome everyone to the launch of a very special book that we feel privileged to have played a part in. Many of you here tonight will have known Rod and Rachel Saunders and of their great passion for plants and especially gladioli. They were founders of Silver Hill Seeds and Books in Kenilworth, Cape Town, and they were well known among the botanical and gardening communities, well loved too. I first heard about the Saunders through the tragic news in the media after their abduction and deaths early in 2018, while they were on a field trip in KwaZulu-Natal. The horror and tragedy of that event was still very much in my mind when later that year, Fiona Ross contacted me to ask if we would consider publishing a field guide based on the Saunders research and photography of the Gladiolus genus. There was no question in my mind. We had to do it. I've since learned a lot about Rod and Rachel, about their sense of adventure, their great love for the outdoors, their endurance and tenacity, and their long and sometimes precarious trips taken in a quest to find and photograph every wild species of Gladiolus in South Africa. The material they gathered over many years was extensive, and Rachel had a clear sense in her mind of how the book she and Rod had planned should look. And in fact, she'd started to compile and design some of the species entries herself. But the mammoth task of sorting through the material, volumes of notes, emails, and thousands of photographs fell largely to Fiona, who used a sabbatical to tackle the task of completing a manuscript for submission, not to mention selecting photographs from the Saunders' vast collection. As professor of anthropology at UCT, Fiona must have been right out of her comfort zone. But her deep sense of commitment, love, and respect for dear, close friends saw her more than succeed. It has been a pleasure working with Fiona and sharing in the task of bringing Rod and Rachel's work to fruition in this beautiful guide. We've all been left with a sense of gratitude and enormous respect for the Saunders' energy, enthusiasm, and great volume of work. And we now have a much better understanding of plants that we'd known mostly from flower sellers' buckets. John Manning writes in his foreword to the book that, like himself, Rod and Rachel fell under the Gladiolus spell. After partnering with Fiona in this worthy venture, I would say that we have too. So thank you, Fiona, for inviting us to join you in this, and congratulations on an amazing job. Thank you. Back to you, Rupert.
Thank you, Pippa. So right now, and you unleashed quite a lot there in the very short introduction, one of it just being the sense of magic that Gladiolus have, and I think it's a theme that will be returned to through the course of the evening. I just want to introduce now, as John Manning was heard of, he's unfortunately not able to join us this evening because he's doing field work in the Northern Cape. So we went ahead and pre-recorded. And basically everyone who's interested in bulbs, so most of you on this call would know Dr. John Manning's work on Iridaceae. He's based at the Compton Herbarium at Kirstenbosch, working for SANBI. And just earlier this year, I don't know if you can see this, but there's this massive book, the Iridaceae, which Peter Goldblatt and John put together, which is a conspectus of the family. And in a way, forms a really nice baseline for the Gladiolus book, which is a field guide. This is not a field guide, it's 4.5 kilos. But we've pre-recorded John's message, and I'm going to play that right now.
Thanks, Rupert. Peter Goldrat and I met Rod and Rachel Saunders during the preparation of our monograph that Rupert's mentioned, Gladiolus in Southern Africa, which was published locally by Fynbos Press in 1994, which is a long time ago now. It stimulated a lot of interest among bulb fanciers worldwide, especially here in South Africa. And in the years following its publication, a handful of additional species were discovered in the region. And this stimulated the Saunders to produce an updated field guide to Gladiolus in South Africa. And we shared, Peter and I, vicariously in this exciting endeavor, especially as we had not managed to find quite all of the species in the wild for ourselves. And that's an image showing myself on the left and Peter Goldrat on the right in the Drakensberg, and a copy of Gladiolus in Southern Africa that we produced. You can see it's much used. And this is just an indication to you of the descriptions of the more recent species that appeared since the publication of Gladiolus in Southern Africa. In general, gladioli are now so entrenched in our minds through their use as cut flowers that it's difficult to imagine a time when they were not as well known in the public consciousness. And just a century ago, for instance, a garden writer could write, "We have to acknowledge that it," which is Gladiolus, "can hardly be classed as one of the great flowers of the people." Well, while that might have been true in the early 20th century, it's certainly no longer true now. And by the middle of the century, Dutch bulb growers were selling more Gladiolus corms each season than all of the summer autumn planting bulbs together. And in our context, what's most surprising about this is that the commercial gladioli that you buy in florists and horticultural shops and garden centers are derived from hybridization among just a handful of the 270 known wild species, notably the South African Gladiolus delini, Gladiolus oppositeflorus, Gladiolus cardinalis, and Gladiolus papilio. To just look at the history of the genus, it was formally named by the Swedish taxonomist Carl Linnaeus in 1753, although the name Gladiolus itself dates back to Roman times and is derived from the diminutive of the Latin gladius, which is the straight stabbing sword of the legionnaires. And it refers, of course, to the sword-shaped leaves of the Mediterranean species and several of the Southern African species. And that name persists today in the name gladiator. Although the Eurasian species were the first gladioli to be recorded in botanical literature, it's quite certain that the first to be utilized by humans were African. And the corms of the widespread sub-Saharan Gladiolus delini are still eaten in parts of tropical Africa today and are used medicinally in some of the traditional pharmacopoeias. If we look at the distribution of the genus, wild gladioli are found throughout Africa and Eurasia, but their distribution is very uneven across this area, and we can recognize 4 main centers, with very few species extending beyond each of these regions. By far, the greatest number of species, 169 as of today, occur in Southern Africa, and mainly in South Africa. It's followed by tropical Africa, which is home to an approximate 85 species. And then finally, there's a handful of species each in Madagascar and in Eurasia. And clearly, South Africa is the center of diversity for the genus, especially the southwestern portion comprising, in botanical terms, the Greater Cape floristic region, which is the southwestern parts of Northern Cape and Western Cape. Southern Africa is clearly the home of gladioli, and our evolutionary work suggests that the genus evolved here in the geological period known as the Miocene, which extended from approximately 20 to 5 million years ago. And then from its origin here, it spread northwards into tropical Africa and further into Eurasia. This is a map showing the distribution of the genus across the world. As you can see, starting at the top in the north, Mediterranean basin and parts of Eurasia, approximately 10 species. Tropical Africa, 85 or so. Madagascar, 8 or so species. And then Southern Africa, 169. What's really exciting about the genus is that although the flowers of each individual species are mostly very beautiful, there's a huge diversity in the flower colors, shapes, fragrances among the species. And through the hundreds of hours of field study that Peter and I did for our study in the genus, we now know that this wonderful floral diversity is the evolutionary influence of the birds and insects that have pollinate or that pollinate the flowers. And each class of pollinator, whether it's long-tongued flies, for instance, or bees, or birds, or beetles, has driven the form of the flowers in such characteristic ways that we can actually predict the pollinator for any species, even if we don't know it. And literally, therefore, we hold the key to explaining the floral variety in the genus. This is very exciting in terms of one's appreciation and understanding. And so finally, finding and identifying wild gladioli adds enormously to our enjoyment and appreciation of the natural world. Generally, we could actually consider that each species to be one of nature's ambassadors. And thanks to this marvelous new field guide, we can actually gain an introduction to each one of them. And I really would like to encourage each of you to make a special effort to learn more about the details of our wonderful flora while we have an opportunity to do so, because it's vanishing in an increasing rate. And this, finally, this guide is not only a testament to the enthusiasm of Rod and Rachel Saunders, but to everybody who's been involved in it and to all of those who love and study South Africa's flora. So please get a copy and enjoy it.
Thank you, John. And he obviously extends his best to this audience, and it's especially to Fiona for the work done on the book. I'm going to do a quick presentation around the conservation of gladioli, and then we can start looking at the Q&A for the end. So don't think that we won't get to you. Right. Okay. So I think from a magic point of view, gladioli, for me as a kid growing up, was definitely a floral gateway drug. My dad, these two species, Gladiolus alatus on the left, the calquinque, and on the right, Coronatus, the papi, are both beautiful and also fragrant. And we grew up as kids. My dad, this time of the year, took us out to field because where he grew up, they were common, and he made sure that we had experienced that. And I'm continuing the tradition over here with my daughter on the right-hand side. I'm not the only one. I spoke to Jan Vlok earlier today, who some of you will know, and he also told me about the fact that he grew up as a young man, a young child actually, growing gladioli for pleasure. But I think just it's important to contextualize some of the conservation actions or what's happening in the genus. And I want to thank Ismail Ibrahim from Crew for giving me an updated version of the red list status, but we've only got like a couple of minutes to flick through it. Right. So as you can see on the right-hand side there on the graph, of the 166 species in South Africa, more than half of them are either range restricted or threatened or rare in a way. And this diversity, as John said, is very much kind of based around in the Fynbos of the Western Cape. But interestingly enough, if you look at the most endangered species, the critically endangered and endangered ones, they're quite evenly spread across the country. Some from Mpumalanga, KZN, Eastern Cape. And the threats to them are very your standard threats. You know, it's invasive species like these pines, habitat degradation, and overgrazing being one lifted out, mining and attended effects. And once you've got your hands on the book, you'll see that there's quite a few of these aquatic species that are found there. And those ones are quite susceptible to water abstraction. So if you think about groundwater abstraction, which reduces water, as well as potential dam building, and latterly the effects of climate change, which would affect how water ends up in our rivers and streams. And then habitat loss, you know, the usual thing of development for various reasons. So just one of the most endangered gladioli, because this is a good silver eel seed story, is Gladiolus Aureus. And I've got this information from Stellenbosch Botanical Garden, the curator, Dr. Don Kirkwood. And if you're interested, they're very focused on bulbs. So check them out on Instagram. And it's a single site peninsula endemic close to Kommetjie. And in 2019, silver eel seeds were used and sowed 450 of them. And right now on the right-hand side, these are the progeny of that first batch. So out of about just under 500 seeds sown, there are about 100 that have made it to flowering adulthood. But this just shows a couple of things. A, we've got to work to keep the habitat intact because these plants are such specialists. And B, once we do start getting them into collections, it's important that we have seed sources and so forth. And that's where programs like SANBI, working with the Millennium Seed Bank, come in handy. But the key is to have the habitat, but also to know where they are. And to know where they are, you've got to know what they look like, hence the book again. So I think throughout my career in conservation, people will always be like, okay, it's terrible, but what can we do? And we've got a few more options than we did before. And the first one that I would draw people's attention to, if you're not using it yet, is to go onto the iNaturalist platform or get the app, because there's a direct link now between your information that gets submitted to iNaturalist and then that gets used for red listing and other conservation mapping by SANBI. And I know that right now the Iridaceae family and Gladioluses will be up next in the queue is currently being re-red listed. So some of the last assessments were from between 2006 and 2010. So that's coming up right now. Then the next thing is to to socially incentivize good behavior. We've got fantastic environmental laws in this country, but I think it's still a bit abstract in terms of the enforcement. It's not even across the board. And us as people who've got social capital, and I think in this audience, most of us are within 2 or 3 degrees of separation to a landowner. So we need to be talking to those landowners and say, you know, do the right thing towards the environment. Yeah, we can put some information in the follow-up email as well if people are interested in that sort of thing. And then something that Rachel was really, really passionate about was the fact that this time of year, mowing happens when the bulbs are out. And, you know, we had endless conversations around the road of the Koa Bokkerveld, and there's a little patch where Morea tilbagensis, sorry, not the gladiolus, grows in Gouda. And currently in the city of Cape Town, and you can take down that email address, there is a no-mow campaign for spring. So you can put forward your local open space if there are some plants that you're interested in, to be put forward as a place that can be considered for reduced mowing during season. So these are all things that didn't exist a couple of years ago. I mean, I'm busy doing some work checking out what the basis of this no-mow stuff is. And basically, it's a 25-year process. It's not just something that happened last year. And that just shows we need to chip at it. But this is the site on the right-hand side, just up the road from my house, where I've been walking for 5 years. And this year, with the no mowing, is the first year that I've seen this Gladiolus Watsonius in it. So it's just been hanging out there, the corm, just waiting for a chance. And if you've been driving on the M3 towards town, where the fire came down, almost right to the road, there's a mass flowering in that game camp as well, just below Rhodes Memorial. So keep your eyes out. Gladiolus are everywhere. They're magical. And it's so good to be part of this launch and for Botsoc to have supported this book, because it just does do something to have people who've loved these plants so much, to have written this book in this way. And I think that's the key, is that you can feel the love oozing out of the pages, both from the Saunders and Fiona. So thank you so much. Fiona,
Okay.
I think it's the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Wow, it's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to have so many people here. And I know many of the people who are here are people who really love Rod and Rachel, so that's also very special. Okay, so I am partly going to read, and I hope you'll forgive me for that, but I'm sure you'll understand why. A book is a wonderful thing, and a botanical book is truly extraordinary. It brings together the elsewhere, the ranging world of a genus or a biome, into a single compact space, just that. It condenses time, the histories of use, of appreciation, of collection, of knowledge, of science, into the immediate, the now, of holding a book, this book, which represents what we know of this genus in this time at this place. And in this case, it's also an object of great beauty. You've heard from John Manning about the genus and its importance. You've heard from Rupert about how vulnerable it is and what we can do to conserve it and the ecologies that it inhabits. Pippa told you why Struik agreed to the project. I'm going to take you through how the book began and how it was made. It's a story of knowing the world through movement and attention. As John told us, there are 169 species of Gladiolus in Southern Africa. 166 of them occur in South Africa, and there are 3 subspecies. They're spread across the country in summer and winter rainfall areas. They grow in mountainous areas and drylands. They grow in marshes and flatlands. Some, such as Microcarpus, grow in waterfalls. Others, such as Laparizoides, grow in areas so arid that some years they receive no rainfall at all and they don't flower. Some are known from only tiny populations. Latiniensis, for example, is recorded from only the Luteni Valley, above 1,800 meters in the Drakensberg. It's quite a hike to get there, and then you still got to find them. Simonziae had not been recorded for 30 years, and Rod and Rachel returned to the same area of the Drakensberg 4 years in a row to try to find flowering plants. So finding them was no small task. It involved careful planning, a lot of driving, and a lot of walking. It was preceded by years of hiking, of botanizing, and photographing. We think that their project, or we remember that their project began about a decade ago. They already had an extraordinary botanical knowledge, as you all know. They were very well known internationally, both as seed merchants and explorers, and particularly for their deep, deep knowledge of South African bulbs. They gathered data from published sources, from colleagues and friends, from botanical networks, and then they began the search in earnest. So they already had a whole lot of data and a whole lot of photographs, but it seems that about 2012 was when this project really took off and became a thing in their lives. And we all, those of us who were close to them, all remember the expeditions, them going off, looking. Anybody who walked with them will remember, you know, with Rod and Rachel, you stopped for photographs and you stopped for tea and not much else. Between 2012 and 2014, they found about half of the species or more. It was very quick. Rachel began writing the book in 2014, and while they were still searching. So they carried on looking, but she trained herself in InDesign and began writing the book. What struck us then, and strikes us still, is the networks involved. So many people and so many places. plants people, landowners, experts, enthusiasts, people who knew people who knew people who might know where to find a rare species. The other thing that's worth noting is the scale of their project and the effort that it involved. Rod and Rachel never did anything by halves, and this was one of those projects. It involved walking, driving, moving, recording, recording, recording. Now that we have a complete collection of their photographs, you can see in the collection how the project took form. In the beginning, it was just photographs of flowers, and then over time, they began to add other features as the idea for the guidebook took hold. So over time, more pictures of caterpillars, pictures of seeds, of seed collections, seed capsules. And some of those actually fill important gaps in scientific knowledge. It's areas where there was no recording before. Some of the plants were very easy to find. They were accessible on the side of roads, in fields. They were widespread and regular flowering. Delini, opposite Eflorus, the beautiful little Kalkuniki, the orange gladiolus that's in flower in the Western Cape that we all know and love. Others were much less easy. Some only flower after fire. And I always remember Rachel, like her exuberance at finding a whole hillside of Gladiolus phoenix in full flower after a fire in 2014 or 2015 in the Bainskloof. Some of them flower in completely inaccessible regions. As I said, Lutenensis and Simonsia both flower above 1800 meters in the Drakensberg. Some flower in perennial streams and restricted ranges. Aquamontanus, for example, only flowers in a 70 square kilometer radius in the Swartberg. And then there were some that had not been seen in decades. Simonsia, and Utenhagensis were two of those. By the time of the tragic deaths in February 2018, Rod and Rachel had found all but one. Gladiolus utenhagensis flowers only after fire, is known only from, at that time, 2 populations, and hadn't been seen in generations. Ironically, it flowered in the spring after they died. After their deaths, we were determined to see the project to completion. It wasn't simple. We formed a trust and we began to work on an archive. Matt Wolf scoured hard drives and backups and eventually collated 14,000 high-quality images. We found an incomplete draft of a text in an outdated InDesign program, which Pippa was very kindly and luckily able to convert back into a PDF and then Word for us. There were 2 files full of scraps of paper, GPS positions, emails, names, scraps of conversations, herbarium records, lots of odd little odds and ends that I would have loved to have known what was in Rachel's mind when she was writing them. We collated the extraordinary wealth of publications on this genus, Goldblatt and Manning's magisterial text, which had been preceded by Delpierre and Duplessis' book, and Lewis and Obermeier's account before that. We also compiled the records for the 5 plants that had been found subsequent to the publication of Goldblatt and Manning's text. It took 2.5 years, 1.5 of them full-time, to pull together the information and generate the book that you now see. And I'm sure you'll agree, it is simply spectacular. I want to acknowledge and thank the University of Cape Town for giving me the sabbatical to work on this project. Not only was it a very fulfilling project, but a very beautiful one to do in the middle of lockdown and a very rewarding one to honor our friends. I want to acknowledge Rod and Rachel's family and friends, Matt, Ondine, Thomas, Andy, Sarah, and Hannah. I want to say thank you to Pippa. When the 3 of us walked into her office with this madcap idea, dressed in a nondescript fashion and looking sort of slightly down and out, she simply said yes. She simply said yes. It was the most amazing thing. So Pippa, thank you for your belief in this project, your trust and your support in making it happen. The design team has done a spectacular job. They received 169 folders with about 8 folders in each. I don't know what that adds up to. It's a lot of folders. And a PDF file and a bunch of checklists and some hand-drawn maps. And they turned it into this absolutely beautiful book that you can see here. And here I want to say thank you to Natalie. Natalie Bell worked so closely and so intimately with this book in such a gentle and caring way that the entire book carries the imprint of her and of her generosity in working with me to make this happen. Okay, I owe big thanks to John Manning. Quite apart from being the world guru on Gladioli, he was also extraordinarily patient. I know for a fact that I asked him the same question more than once, and I know for a fact he answered it very politely. And I also know for a fact that it was a very stupid question. But he's been incredible in his support for this project, in working with Struik and I to make the material possible, and also with working with Rod and Rachel as they tried to figure out some of the very complicated forms that they had found, things that may or may not have been processed, things that may or may not have been transitioning into new species. I'd like to thank Rupert too for making the video and for taking this to heart. When we decided to run with this project and to finish the book, we just put out the word that we were looking for donations, and people from all over the world gave unbelievably generously. I'd like to thank Mapula Trust for a large grant that helped to kickstart the work, and then the many people from China, from Japan, from New Zealand, from Australia, from North America, from South America, from the UK, from Europe, and of course from Southern Africa, who all gave, often anonymously, to the making of this book. I really hope that you think we did well. The aim of the book is threefold. Its first aim is scientific. It's to provide a photographic record, the only full photographic record of the South African species of the genus, including filling some gaps where scientific information was lacking. The second aim is to encourage ordinary people, people like me, I'm not a botanist, to take an interest in an unusual genus with a wide range and a great deal of diversity, to learn, to explore, to share, and to protect. The third aspect, which is not one that Rod and Rachel ever intended, is that it is a celebration of their botanical life and their loves. The material on which the book is based is protected by a trust. It will become part of the scientific domain so that the rich record, those 14,000 photographs, the GPS locations, the other material that is currently kind of sitting quietly on my shelves, can inform future efforts to understand and secure the genus. We hope that in this book, you find the joy that we know animated Rod and Rachel's search. We hope that in this incredibly difficult time globally, a time of pandemic, a time of change, a time of climate change, a time of great fear, that this book brings a reminder of the beauty and of the importance of creating the conditions under which beauty can flourish. Thank you. Rupert, I'm going back to you.
Thank you, Fiona. I just want to take a breath actually, and you've done so well, and being able to interact with you over the last couple of years, just talking about the book and about the Saunders and about bulbs in general has been fantastic. And I think this really does, open up the idea as to the contribution that non-botanists can do, because it's an apprehension that we always were stuck with in the past, is that people think that something like the Botanical Societies, you need to be a professor in botany to be part of and to hear your voice heard. And here you've shown, and this isn't new, but you've shown that someone who just loves the plants can do this amazing thing, and also that the infrastructure exists for a John Manning and a SANBI and all the other people that have helped to bring it to this product. And I think that's a really good model for us to walk away from here. There are other genera that deserve this level of attention. And it's possible. And I also just want to echo your words around Struik. We're so happy to be partnering with Struik Nature. Especially around botanical publications, because if you don't know about it, then you won't know. and a way to generate knowledge is still to go through this rigorous process of putting a book together. Okay, so audience, thanks for sticking around. It's now actually your time to shine. If there's any questions that you had out of the previous couple of presentations, I'm not a taxonomist, so I won't be able to do the nuts and bolts, but we can help you as far as possible and also point you in a direction. The first question I see in the chat is from Tristan Kruger in Gales River, and he was asking which other Gladiolus species besides Gladiolus Aureus are facing imminent danger of extinction in the Cape Floristic region. And so I encourage people that are not from the Cape Floristic region to also send in some questions, because remember, the BOTSOC is national, so we can't just be talking about the Southern Cape. But in answer to your question, Tristan, the three from the list that Ishmael supplied me from Crew in the Western Cape that are critically endangered are Gladiolus Stoko Aureus, obviously, and then Grisius from the Saldanha to Milnerton coastal flats, and Rosio venosus, which is from the Outeniqua Mountains, and that last one is threatened by plantations and pines. So yeah, I'm open for questions or follow-ups. There are queries about where the book can be had, so just keep an eye on the chat. Oh, here's a question for you, Fiona. How on earth did you choose a cover picture? It must have been agony to choose even one. Yeah, so just unmute yourself, please.
Tony, I copped out. I actually told Natalie that she needed to speak to John. So we ended up with two cover pictures that we sent out to a couple of people to suss out and decide which was, the preferable one. And the odds came back even. So we put Pavona on the front. So that's the one that you see on the front. And on the inside cover, we put Gladiolus latiniensis, which was the compromise. It was impossible to choose. They're so beautiful. And I mean, you can imagine there's 14,000 photographs. Like, where do you even begin? So thank goodness John intervened and Natalie took over.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes you do have to give it over to someone who knows better.
You've got to give it to the experts, Rupert.
Yeah. There's a question from Beth, and I'll see if I can answer that. As this book will encourage many to look for a tour. Are there plans to put together tours for people of varying levels of botanical knowledge? Yeah, so that's an interesting one, because I think all of us who've traveled, especially in search of plants, there's nothing like local knowledge to replicate it. And currently, with the fact that tourism is down and so forth, it's a bad time for guides, and especially specialist guides. And so there are a few around, but I think if there's sufficient queries coming through at some stage for tours for people with botanical knowledge, is the late Cameron McMaster. We were also involved with the book launch of the Nosterveld Field Guide last year. It was also like a bulb enthusiast, was someone who took these walks, and I think this is the way we get to know and love. So noted, I'm making a note over here, and we'll see how we can take it forward. There's a question from Lucille Kricher about why is Gladiolus Stoko considered endangered, and I'm going back to my spreadsheet. And the threats there are unmanaged alien invasive pines that are spreading rapidly across the species' highly restricted range. And there's also Hackia. So like we said, alien invasives, and for those of you who caught our BOTSOC webinar last month on alien invasives, there's definitely a call for us as citizens and volunteers to also look at where some of these threatened plants are and see if we can go help them. There's that fantastic sports hacking idea that Don Kotz has come up with. Yeah, any other questions from there? Oh, Natalie was saying in the chat, Fiona, do you want to read that out?
Yeah, I'll read that out. Thank you, Natalie, for the correction. Natalie says, as a matter of interest, our concept designer at Struik had a great eye and selected the cover image very early on in the process. We sent out a few options, but she managed to select a winner from the outset. And it's so true. It is so beautiful. You won't be able to see it very clearly, but in fact, it's embossed. So it shines. It's just the most beautiful, beautiful book. I don't think I've ever held a book as beautiful as this.
No, it is a stunner. And even so, there'll be the traditionalists who are like, wow, this is embossed. We're not really the kind of thing. But it's all open to taste, and for us, it's fantastic. I'm looking for any more questions. There's a question, Belinda, around the price of the book, and it might be a good time, Belinda, for you to come on and just tell us about the special.
Rupert's put me on the spot here. There's a special offer that's happening on the new Struik Nature shop, and I've put the link in the chat, and it's a 20% off. The special's going for until the 2nd of September, and if you put the voucher code name Saunders into when you're checking out, then you will get your 20% off. And
cool, thank you.
Okay.
I'm just going to say that this book is really aimed at people who want to know. So it has maps that'll give you a general location. It's got descriptions of where the plants are to be found, what they might be found alongside. One of the tragedies of the loss of Rod and Rachel's material was that part of what they were collecting was information about ecosystems, and that material, we've never been able to find it. But where we have it, it's there. And it also includes the SANBI Red Data status at the moment. So those people who want to know that information is also in the book. But it's the most amazing thing for an amateur like me to walk into, we were in Robertson with friends 2 weeks ago, and we walked up a hill and there were some gladioli, and to be able to figure out what they were was just the most wonderful experience. It was amazing to be able to say, oh, well, it can't be this and it must be that, and oh, this doesn't occur in this area. Oh, look, it's that. It's such a fulfilling thing to be able to do. So, what Rod and Rachel have given to the world is that pleasure. It's that simple pleasure of being able to find oneself in an environment.
Thank you. And there's another question for you from Sandy Young. I'm going to read it out. As someone who is not a botanist, but someone who is very involved in the production of knowledge, in what ways did you have to shift gear, Fiona? And what surprised you about this field and the way that Rod and Rachel worked? I can see from the sheer beauty of the book that you certainly did find an intuitive way into the material.
Well, the intuitive way to the material is largely because the book is very beautifully designed. It was fascinating. So professionally, I'm an anthropologist. My job is to understand how other people think. That's professionally what I do. And so I entered this terrain trying to understand how botanists think. It was a wonderful challenge. And I learned very quickly how beautifully nuanced and subtle botanical writing actually is. Because what appears on the surface to be a very simple description really, really isn't. So I think what surprised me, well, I knew that there was a great deal of botanical knowledge. I already had copies of John Manning's books, for example. Rod and Rachel had given me, or given Andy and I, the tome, the Gladiolus tome, which is an extraordinary book. So I knew that there was a great deal of knowledge. I knew that there was a great deal of history and that it was well recorded. I think what surprised me was the extraordinary subtlety, because as social scientists, you tend to, because we rely on words so heavily, we think that the subtlety lies there. Whereas I can't describe this very well. The very disconcerting thing, Sandy, about the process, though, has been that I forgot how to think like an anthropologist after a while. So I certainly don't think like a botanist, but it was hard coming back to work at the beginning of this year and trying to teach like an anthropologist again. I think, it's a professional jeopardy, that moving across two spaces. And taxonomies, and we don't use taxonomies anymore. So it was really, really interesting trying to figure out how a taxonomic system works and how it fits in relation to other kinds of knowledge. I hope I answered that question.
Well, I think so. And Sandy, you can let us know if you're not. So for people who have asked about the price of the book is 420 Rand and less 20% on the special. And I can't calculate and Zoom at the same time. So if you could work that out for yourself, that would be wonderful. Thank you. While we're talking about specials, we've also got a special from the Botanical Society at the moment in honor of spring. There's a 10% off for everyone who either renews or becomes a member until the 31st of September, but only if you do it online. And Belinda will stick that link in the chat as well, because we want to be able to continue doing this work and connecting the people who love plants and making sure that we can get a good bang for conservation buck, but also just enjoying it, you know. I'm not seeing any more questions right now. So we want to end punctually at 7 o'clock, but we will end before that, so that we don't have 10 minutes of dead time. But I wonder, Pippa, can I put you on the spot if you have any kind of closing thoughts about this?
Can you hear me?
I can.
I think I've been blocked out. The co-host
just put your video on again, please.
I wasn't able to, but I'll try now. Okay.
Ah, there we go. It's working.
All I can really say is that it was as I said at the beginning, it was such a privilege to work on this book. And I know that for many of us, we really didn't know that there were so many gladioli in the wild of South Africa, and that South Africa was the main center of them. It was a wonderful learning experience for us, and it was such a special privilege to work on the book. It really was. I think everybody who was involved, Fiona referred to the design team. The design team was essentially Gillian Black, who handled the whole design, and she worked very closely with Natalie, and they worked very closely with Fiona. And our managing editor, Rolene, as well, had a very big role to play. And this title team working on the book just fell in love with gladioli. And a lot of us in the team are hikers, and we can't go on a hike without discovering a gladiolus now. And I would never have seen one of them before. So, and now I find that whenever I hike, my eyes are on the ground looking for a gladiolus plant, and I found a number, and it's been fantastic. So, and it really was wonderful working with Fiona. And even though the book started from a place of great sadness, it's such a triumph. And I think it's a wonderful tribute to Rod and Rachel. And I know that they would, I'm sure, be so proud of what Fiona did. So I think enormous thanks to Fiona, as I said, and to my great team. I work with a great team. It's a wonderful book. It really is. And I can't recommend it enough. Thank you.
Thanks, Pippa. Robin Hansen from the Pacific Bulb Society said they want to do a bulk order. Robin, if you check in the chat there, Belinda has given you the email address for Sasha Nicholas, who handles the overseas purchases and shipping. Fiona, I know you haven't really prepped for this one, but there was a thing in the chat, a question from Bob Bagri. For those of you who didn't know them, for attendees who didn't know them, could you give us a brief bio of their lives and loves? And I mean, that's actually a half-an-hour conversation, but do you think you could give 5 minutes? I'd like to say something about Rod and Rachel. Like you see all that big beard, there was a big laugh behind it. He had an impish sense of humor. So did Rachel. She was a bit low-key, but yeah, she was a fantastic person. But I'm going to let Fiona, if you want to, maybe just talk a little bit about them and their background.
Okay, well, I can't really do justice to who they were as botanists, but I can tell you who they were as people. And they were wonderful, wonderful friends who loved the world. They were enormously generous in their appreciation of what the world offered. They spent many, many, many days, weeks, months, years hiking in the mountains, exploring. Professionally, Rachel trained as a microbiologist and Rod as a horticulturalist. And then after a while, they bought Silver Hill Seeds and ran the seed company, which has a very big international footprint. It's a very well-known seed company internationally, and Ondine Struik now runs that company. They also helped my husband Andy set up Frontier Laboratory. In fact, I'm in Frontier right now talking to you. But mostly, I think what I would say about Rod and Rachel is quite simply that they were themselves. They were as idiosyncratic as could be. They didn't give a damn about what society thought. They did what they knew to be right. They had enormous integrity. And they were wonderful, wonderful friends. I miss them terribly.
Thank you, Fiona. Sorry for springing that on you like that. Right. I think you did them justice. There was a question, Belinda's answered it already, about whether there would be a recording, and it will be on YouTube, as well as everyone who's registered for this event will get a follow-up email, and we'll also put in a couple of additional conservation links just for fun. And there's now a point from William, who wants to write an article for the BBC. And William, maybe let's put your email in that email that goes out afterwards for whoever would want to contact you. I think that would be fitting, and you get a cross section of all the attendees. And I think that's pretty much almost the end. Belinda, do you want to ask us anything else? I'm just, from the Botanical Society point of view, so happy to be involved. We love plants, we love plant books, we love beautiful plant books. And you know, we look forward to the next publication where we can interact like this and see how we can take it forward. Yeah, so shall we shut down, team? Are there any last words?
Thanks everyone for joining us. It's been a beautiful launch. It's wonderful to have so many people. And thank you, Rupert. I really appreciate you emceeing. And Fiona, thanks so much for everything that you've done. And to Pippa and the Struik Nature team, thank you. And thank you to the Botanical Society as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks. Good night.